Hey everyone. Okay, now we're going to be doing a lecture on editing, and hopefully, if you're doing everything in order, you have already watched The Shining, because I'm going to use that for a lot of the examples today. Um, but first, let's do some review. We had already had a lecture on mise en scène, and part of the goal was thinking about how all of these little elements, settings, costumes, props, composition, color, lighting, composition again, oops, movement, how all of these things affected the look and feel of The Shining. And I will not sit here and talk to myself. I mean, I know I'm talking to you, but talking to a camera. But I do hope that you were able to process some of these things in terms of, for instance, how we see red in all of these different places and why strategically. I mean, blood falling out of the elevator aside. Props, some things that I love talking about, and we'll get to later in the semester, because I will bring up The Shining when we talk about symbolism and things like that, is if you do some deep dives on this movie, you'll realize that even props related to food in the storage room is theorized to be part of the cues that the audience is supposed to sort of take subliminally about some of the themes that are in this movie about things like white supremacy and Native American genocide, for instance. Ooh, there's a little teaser. And thinking about how in different scenes, things like close-ups were used, things like motifs such as mazes. I mean, we see mazes on the carpet, and of course, the actual maze. Symmetry, right? Like not just with how things were shot, but like literally even with the creepy twins. And I had told you this before. One of my favorite things about The Shining is the lighting. I like the lighting and all of the scenes. I like the diffuse, um, sort of high key lighting with the snow coming in, where it's like kind of magical, but also incredibly creepy in terms of like how the light goes in. I love the chandeliers that are sometimes on and sometimes off, and they're used to sort of light the dimly lit hotel. I love it all. I love it all. The Shining's great. It's beautiful, and creepy. Oh, the lighting also with at the bar here, where again it was like sort of the camping lighting again. Anyway, okay, I'll stop. We'll start talking about editing, but I do hope that you can continue thinking about different things in The Shining that made you feel different types of things, and maybe even start to link that back to actually what was going on in the scenes. Okay, so editing is an important part of film, because if we didn't have editing, basically you would just it would be like watching this horrible lecture. Although I can edit this lecture, I just choose not to. Where you would just have to, watch one long cut happen no matter what happened in it or how boring it was, right? Editing is how we consolidate things. We make it so that you can watch something for 2 hours and only see the interesting parts, but of course it has narrative functions too. Most of the things that gets filmed gets edited out. As I have up here, they say a film is made 3 times. First by the screenwriter who writes it. We'll talk about that later. Second by the director and crew. And then the editor comes in post-production and whacks it all up. Kubrick is famous for, I mean, listen, everybody takes a lot of footage, but Kubrick is famous for having a lot of footage, in part because of his sort of like perfectionism. He was notorious for making his actors do a lot of takes. So he might have them do 100 takes of the same scene, but then only one scene makes it in. Everything else gets edited out and, mushed together in a different way. The Shining, here, Kubrick shot 102 feet of film for every 1 foot that actually ended up being used. So he had over 100 times what was needed for this movie. Um, and there's the same. So I don't, I hate to simplify it, but your textbook encouraged me to. Um, but these are sort of some overarching uses of editing in terms of like what filmmakers are thinking when they're editing. Um, I think that the most interesting one personally, because I'm a media psychologist, is to create meaning and emotion. When you edit one image and put it next to another image, that creates associations in our mind, which we'll talk about in a second. But of course, it's important to move time and space to make people sort of understand the way that time is working within your film. And then you also need to be concerned with creating a sense of continuity or discontinuity. If editing isn't done well, then people will start to feel disoriented and then they won't be able to pay attention, or it might not feel like a real world to them, right? They won't be able to immerse themselves. Um, these are just some, whatever, like this is, it's hard to do editing, to talk about editing with just like a still shot, but I was like, oh, this is a dissolve. You see that? So a dissolve is one way of editing. I don't know. Forget it. That's fine. Um, okay, if I had done my lectures like I do in class, I probably would have added a lot more history, and I'm sad that I couldn't, but I want to keep things simple. But this is such an important part of history. I got to go back to it. In early film history, the Russian filmmaker Eisenstein did a very famous, it was a silent film called The Battleship Potemkin. And in it, he had taken sort of an observation that this guy Kuleshov, also Russian, had 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 made in his own filmmaking, and then he sort of like, showed the dramatic capacity of it. And basically, the Kuleshov effect, in its most simple and the most simple explanation, is that they realized that it's like if you take one image, it's what I said in when I was talking the last slide, and put it next to another image, then people use both images to pull out some sort of meaning from it. These images might not have anything to do with each other, but when you put them together side by side, or in the case of film, one right after the other, then people assume that they do have something to do with each other. So the example here, and if you can see, I'm using my cursor here, is so here's just a picture of a dude, right? Like he's just sitting there with his tie, and he has like no um, animated expression on his face. I mean, really, his face is very it lacks affect. Okay, so you don't really know what he's thinking. He almost looks dead, frankly, but who am I to judge? So, but then if you're showing, and you can watch this on YouTube if you want to actually see the motion picture, but if you show a picture of this man just staring, and then the next scene that you show is a picture of somebody in a coffin, then think about what sort of associations your mind automatically makes. Maybe that he's sad because he lost somebody, or maybe just that he's thinking about somebody he lost, and therefore it creates sadness. Okay, forget the coffin though. Same dull expression, nothing's going on. This guy means nothing. There's no meaning we have there. But then let's say the next scene was a bowl of soup. Then all of a sudden we assume, maybe he's thinking about his soup. Maybe he's hungry, right? And then if there's like a little hottie afterwards, right? Then it's like, oh, he must be lusting after. So all of these examples, this is the Kuleshov effect, is it's an editing effect, you understand? Because you can take one scene that has nothing to do with another scene, but if you just put them together so that people see them sequentially, then then our mind automatically makes associations. It creates meaning, okay? And as I mentioned, this film that came out in 1929 really showed the power of it. It was, like I said, and you can look it up on YouTube if you'd like to actually see it. If you do, look up, there's a scene called the Odessa Steps, and it's basically a scene where there's a massacre happening. No massacre actually happens, but it doesn't matter, right? Because editing was there, and if you see a bunch of people coming down the steps with guns, and then the next thing you see is, somebody tumbling down, then what can you assume happened? You can assume that somebody got shot, even if you didn't see it, right? So that's just like all of these examples of how editing actually allows us to um, create film things, if you will, that don't actually exist, right? Because the audience doesn't necessarily have to see everything in order to understand what happened, right? Our mind will fill in the gaps. So um, that is, a very basic example of how editing can create meaning. Um, And the idea is, right, there's got to be this juxtaposition. So just thinking about like some examples from The Shining, like, right, it's sort of, there was this one scene where um, Halloran was back at his apartment and you hear the Shining music, right? And then the next scene cut to Danny and he's like foaming at the mouth and, sort of having, like a little bit of a breakdown. And you might not understand on a exactly what's going on, right? Because you're not being haunted and you don't have the shining. But all of a sudden, like this editing scene, like helps you make the association that Halloran and Danny are connected in that scene, right? Um, and then, sometimes, and this is classic with like everything, I was like, and this is how editing works. And then like I can probably always find an example of where Kubrick does the opposite just to kind of like screw with us, right? So here was an example of where Jack is in there and he sees the pretty naked lady, right? And what's kind of weird about this is like, part of what I had mentioned is like, it's supposed to like tell us like, okay, Jack is walking in and he's very interested in this lady and you see him um eyeing her just like the dude with his soup and his sexy lady in the in the last scene, right? Um, and then all of a sudden, so the editing, we're facing him, we're facing him, we're facing him, we're thinking about what he wants. And then all of a sudden it switches. And instead of him facing us like he was right here, all of a sudden now he's past us, like his back is to us and we're not even there anymore, and it actually kind of switched the POV. So in that way there was like it changed the continuity a little bit. It actually changed our perspective, and that all happened with just like the flick of an edit, if you will. um, the other important thing, the other important function of editing, of course, is just helping us understand how time and space is moving. The best example of this is like, at the beginning, Wendy's sitting there smoking her cigarette, talking to the doctor, completely denying that her husband has abused her son. And then, bam, 6 months later or whatever it is, they're in the hotel. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, all of a sudden, 6 months passed without anything. And the audience is fine with it. They understand that people have probably, a lot happened. They had to pack things up, you know, but we don't care. We didn't need that. And there wasn't actually any sort of disorientation because we also understand how editing works. Editing is also used to help us with flashbacks and flash forwards. Now, normally there's other things that will indicate to you that this is a different time or space. Sometimes, for instance, people will use different filters, different lenses, so that every time there's a flashback, let's say it's shot in with sort of like a blue tint, whereas every time current day happens, it's kind of like in a warm tint or something like that. Um, but the point is editing allows us to sort of like shift back and forth so that we can see somebody remembering something versus current day or in the future, whatever. Um, Editing also helps us with rhythm. So, one of the things that struck me the first time I saw The Shining was how slow it felt at the beginning. I was interested in it, but everything was going at a relatively slow pace for what I would have expected, perhaps, especially for a horror movie. But I think that's part of it, right? I think that I mentioned in another lecture that Kubrick really likes people to sort of like just have this experience, right, when he's doing things and to sort of just like have you in there. We rushed to get here, 6 months went like nothing. And then, but in the hotel, time kind of stretched out for a little while. And that's because there were these long scenes that were a little bit more drawn out. Whereas, once Jack is actually like trying to chop people down and people are running around, in order to sort of feel that sort of like chaos and how the events of the film were unfolding much more rapidly, the rhythm of the editing also kept going. Um, and finally, continuity editing is also very important. People need to feel like what they are watching makes sense. So that everything is going in a linear progression, or at least if it's not going in a linear progression, that people can sort of like link things back. And they also need to feel, for instance, that like, oh, if one character um, starts to sit down and then it cuts away from him, that when it cuts back to him, the motion still continues. It makes sense. He can't all of a sudden be in a different place, right? That would be weird or creepy or haunted. So editing, just a lot of what's happening in post-production, right, is people are trying to, oops, sorry, people are trying to edit the film to make sure that with all of these different takes, there's consistency between what was happening in one scene across the whole scene. Now, sometimes though, I will say, and this is, I like to teach about this. Don't worry about that. I love this guy. He's the guy who like pretended to be his mother. I mean, like not in a creepy way, in a funny way on social media. But he would have all like he basically like a lot of TikTok video artists, if you will, uses a lot of what we call jump cuts. I mean, if you're just, doing video making on your phone and you want to do basic editing, then what you're probably doing is jumping a lot, right? You don't care that much about things looking smooth for continuity. You just want to mash up a bunch of scenes, and it might even be a little choppy, but that could actually be funny. I mean, it is sort of the style of social media editing. But it communicates something, right? It communicates that a lot has been happening such that things have just have to be chopped up. But it's a jump cut because it literally just jumps from one thing to another. And it's sort of like, how did we get here, right? But again, that can be strategic too if chaos is sort of what you're trying to do. Um, so on that note, when is discontinuity desirable? Um, I like, kid you not, I have not read this book, but there is a book that is literally just about continuity errors in The Shining. Um, like there are so many continuity errors that somebody wrote a book about it. Um, so what does that tell you? Sometimes it is desirable, but again, I'm kind of a broken record here, but I think it's good for learning. Think about what Kubrick was trying to do. Kubrick does not want the audience to be settled. It would be advantageous because of what Kubrick was trying to communicate about the hotel, how he wanted the audience to feel. If the goal is to try to make you feel as sort of creeped out as the characters are, then why not do that with film, right? So there's a lot of discontinuity in terms of, as I've already mentioned some, in terms of props. And here, actually, I think I can bring this up. Hold on. I'm gonna have to share my screen though. If I don't get this, I'll hold on. Just one second. I'm gonna share this. Let me see here. Okay, bear with me. I'm gonna share this. Okay, watch this. So watch the chair. And that's kind of blurry, sorry. You're not written today? Look at the chair. Chair. Hey, weather forecast said it's gonna snow tonight. Where'd the chair go? Where did it go? I can't remember if it comes back or not. It's back. The chair is back. Okay, so you get the point. Now I gotta get back to. Okay, I understand. But now I gotta shut them up. Hold on. I'll edit this out. See, that's how editing works. Yeah. Means that I am working. That means don't come in. Okay, well, I'll have to edit that out for sure. Okay, so the disappearing chair. Again, that is not, that is a very deliberate continuity error. There is no way that somebody post-production missed it. And of course, it's debatable about whether or not Kubrick told people to keep moving the chair around between takes. I don't know. But the point is like in this case, right, there was an advantage to discontinuity. If you're trying to make people feel like something's haunted, then you would play little tricks like that on their subconscious. Um, and it kind of has this effect of gaslighting in a way. It's almost like gaslighting your audience because like your brain's kind of like, did I imagine if in the days when you were just in the movie theater and there wasn't even the possibility of rewinding or something, there would just be this sort of like um sense that something's off and discontinuous, but you'd never really be sure. Um, Anyway, okay, so now a specific sort of like type of editing or like with its own sort of rules and stuff are dialogue scenes because there's a lot of these and normally every dialogue scene is going to start with this master shot of just like two people who are talking so that you just know who's talking. And then once people know who's in the scene, you can kind of, go back and forth to them. And so here you've got, for instance, this lady, I want you to pay attention to this. She's on the left, he's on the right. Okay. So then when you cut to him later, she's still on the left, but you see his face on the right. And then when you cut to him, you see his back but she's still on the left, right? So everybody stays basically, where they're supposed to. This is what's called the 180 rule, basically. It's that you've got these characters and you can switch back and forth, but everything needs to stay basically on the same side, if you will, and you see why it's 180, because if you think about it like a circle, you got to stay here, okay? Um, if you were to put a camera, all of a sudden it's like, oh, he's talking to this lady, and then whatever, and then all of a sudden, like, do something from the other side, it would be like, what? How did we get over there? I mean, we're positioned on this side looking at them. So, if the camera puts it all of a sudden, quote, moves us, right? That's very disorienting. And it's unnatural. Now, there are, of course, there are reasons to do it. One of the cliches of movies about people with like multiple personalities and serial killers and stuff is like they would filmmakers would violate the 180 rule to kind of like represent and orient you to the fact that they aren't completely right. Like you don't know what side of them is up and down. Probably not explaining that right, but so that's an example of where the convention would be violated. And of course, Kubrick also finds excuses to violate this rule too. The classic example is when he's talking to Grady in the bathroom. So it starts off here, and Jack's on the left, Brady's on the right. And then something happens, and if you rewatch the movie, I do think it's significant, but I won't go into it about what exactly they're talking about. And then the way it's edited is to the other side. These men didn't switch places, right? The men are still in the same position in the bathroom. What switched was the camera all of a sudden came like from the back in this scene, oops, to there, basically. So I do want you to think about why that is and what effect it had. And specifically, now that you know more about the narrative, it's like, consider it. It's like, why was that an opportune time to violate the 180 rule? What effect did it have? And I'll leave you on that. So, bye.